Captain Ibrahim Traoré was appointed president of Burkina Faso on Wednesday. The appointment comes less than a week after the latest coup in the West African country, the second in less than 9 months.
France and the United States government needs to back off from any attempt to remove Captain Traoré from office. Forget about your plan. He's our own. He is doing exactly what the people of Burkina Faso and many other African countries wish their leaders were doing for them.
Since assuming leadership of Burkina Faso in September 2022, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has spearheaded a bold transformation, breaking away from the entrenched foreign influence and steering the country towards self-reliance. The aborted assassination attempt of Traoré, allegedly orchestrated by neighboring Ivory Coast, added to the fury of many Africans. Burkina Faso's military junta says it foiled a major plot aimed at sowing total chaos.
The Burkina Faso military leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, believes Donald Trump wants him dead. In fact, he believes Trump paid $5 million to sponsor the April 2025 coup attempt to eliminate him and overthrow his government. So now, the question is, was Trump really involved in the assassination attempt? And why would he want him dead? And then what other Western power was implicated in this scheme? Let's break it all down. It all started in early 2023, when Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young military leader of Burkina Faso, began waging a silent war against the West, specifically the United States and the Burkinabe's former colonial power, France.
France and Burkina Faso have officially marked the end of French military operations in the West African country, the Burkinabe Armed Forces said on Sunday. The flag-lowering ceremony at a French Special Forces camp marks a new chapter in Burkina's battle with groups linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State.
The relationship between the two nations spiraled downhill from there, as Burkina Faso also began building a strong relationship with Russia. Then, in early 2025, Captain Traoré made a bold announcement that his government would no longer export raw gold. Instead, they were going to refine and process their gold locally. Even more shocking, they were also considering using that gold to back a new national currency, one that would not rely on the US dollar or the CFA franc. Now, to most people, this sounds like a patriotic and smart economic move, but you have to understand that in global politics, the right thing is not always the right thing to do. Anyway, it is believed that not long after that announcement, Trump and the French president, Emmanuel Macron, started witch-hunting Traoré. First, Traoré's name was mentioned inside the US Senate, and you can already tell it wasn't for a good reason. During a hearing of the Senate Armed Services Committee, General Michael Langley, head of the United States Africa Command, AFRICOM, made a direct accusation. He claimed that Captain Ibrahim Traoré was hoarding Burkina Faso's gold to protect his regime.
I see this, and I don't mind calling them out, but Captain Traoré and Burkina Faso, as they know that both, whether it's their gold reserves, that is all those proceeds are just in exchange to protect the junta regime.
Now, Langley didn't offer any evidence whatsoever to prove his claims, but none of that mattered, because the moment a U.S. military general accuses a revolutionary African leader of corruption before the Senate, it changes everything. And within hours, Western media picked up the story and flooded the internet with headlines. Even though no proof had been presented at this point, the damage was done. So the question becomes, why? Why would the US care so much about gold in a small African country with no nuclear weapons, no major military, and no threat to American soil? Well, the answer is power. You see, Burkina Faso's decision to refine gold locally and possibly use it to back its own currency is a direct challenge to the US-led global financial system, especially the dominance of the US dollar. And history has shown us what happens when radical leaders try to go against any Western power in Africa and elsewhere.
They keep telling me I would die like Gaddafi, Thomas Sankara, or any other young leader that tried to make Africa better.
Back in the 1980s, Thomas Sankara was a revolutionary Burkinabe president who ruled the country from 1983 to 1987. During this time, launched one of the most radical anti-imperialist reform agendas in modern African history. He nationalized land, rejected foreign aid, exposed France's control over African economies, and spoke out against global exploitation in speeches that still echo today. Sankara was young, bold, and unapologetically Pan-African. And like Traoré, he believed Burkina Faso's resources belonged to its people. But in 1987, he was assassinated in a coup led by his own comrades, with strong support from foreign interests.
35 years after his death, a final goodbye to Thomas Sankara and 12 of his companions who are being laid to rest at a memorial in Ouagadougou. Sankara, a Pan-Africanist revolutionary who was also a feminist and an environmentalist. He sought to lift his people out of poverty and emancipate them from what he saw as the shackles of the former colonial power France.
Something similar happened again when the then Iraqi leader, Saddam Hussein, made moves to begin selling oil in euros instead of dollars under the United Nations Oil for Food program. He called the dollar the currency of the enemy. But then, 3 years later, the US invaded Iraq and captured Saddam. The Bush administration later claimed he was developing weapons of mass destruction, which posed a threat to the US and its allies. But this turned out to be false. No such weapons were ever found.
As news of Saddam Hussein's execution spreads across the globe, reactions within Iraq are mixed. Many Iraqis watch the execution on television.
Then, we have the case of the former Libyan president, Muammar Gaddafi. In 2009, Gaddafi proposed a single African currency, backed by 143 tons of Libyan gold and a similar amount of silver. He called it the gold dinar. Now, why did this matter? Because right now, most African countries don't trade in their own currency. In fact, 14 former French colonies in Africa still keep 50 to 65% of their reserves in the French treasury. Think about that. You dig gold out of your soil, sell it to the world, but you're forced to keep the profit in a foreign bank. That's not independence. That's economic slavery, and Gaddafi wanted to destroy that system.
Meanwhile, Gaddafi antagonized the West, particularly the United States, which labeled Libya a state sponsor of terrorism.
He planned to stop using dollars for oil sales and switch to the gold dinar. He was also building the African Central Bank, the African Monetary Fund, and had already invested billions of dollars to kickstart it. But here's what most people still don't know. When NATO invaded Libya in 2011, their primary objective wasn't to protect civilians.
Today, we can definitively say that the Gaddafi regime has come to an end. The last major regime strongholds have fallen. The new government is consolidating the control over the country.
A confidential intelligence memo, later leaked through WikiLeaks, revealed the real reason. The memo, sent to Hillary Clinton, said the French were terrified Gaddafi's gold currency would replace the CFA franc. Their number one priority, the memo said, was to stop Gaddafi from launching the gold dinar. And guess what? After Gaddafi was killed, Libya's 143 tons of gold vanished. The currency plan collapsed. The country descended into chaos, and the Western oil companies moved in. Now, fast forward to 2025. Captain Traoré announces Burkina Faso will stop exporting raw gold, will build local refineries, and is openly considering backing their currency with that gold. Suddenly, the same script starts to play out again. Accusations of corruption, media pressure, international concern. Meanwhile, the Burkinabe government has clearly stated that all their gold revenue is fully audited and used for development projects like schools, roads, and water systems. And they have equally made it clear that they don't answer to Washington, but the West. They are not just going to fold their hands and watch him get away with all that. On April 16, 2025, Burkina Faso's security forces quietly foiled a military coup that was scheduled to be executed in just a few hours. It was meant to begin in the dead of night and end with Captain Ibrahim Traoré either arrested or dead. Burkina Faso Security Minister Mahamadou Sana later confirmed that the plot involved serving officers and former commanders of the Burkinabe armed forces. Together, they had mapped out a strike that would take down the head of state and dismantle the transitional government before the country could react.
The meticulous work of the intelligence service revealed a major plot being prepared against our country, the ultimate aim of which is to sow total chaos with a view to placing the country under the tutelage of an international organization.
But the coup was unsuccessful because Traoré's most trusted comrades were involved, and they tipped him off. So, the story was that a foreign agent disguised as an investor came to Burkina Faso with a suitcase containing about $5 million. His mission was to bribe soldiers dissatisfied with Traoré's leadership to orchestrate a coup, and he succeeded in handing the money over to them. However, the soldiers did not betray their leader. This led to the arrest of the agent and the uncovering of a broader destabilization scheme involving both internal traitors and foreign interference. Now, the identity of the mastermind behind the plot has not been released, but the question is, who in this world can afford to pay $5 million for the execution of an African head of state? So, now it makes sense why a lot of people believe that Donald Trump and his French colleague would have had a hand in this assassination attempt. Remember that this coup was planned barely 2 weeks after Traoré blocked raw gold exports and announced that Burkina Faso would no longer rely on the CFA franc and the dollar, but rather use the country's gold reserve to back its currency. And the United States started blackmailing him at a Senate hearing just weeks before the coup attempt. Now, combine that with the fact that Traoré was also strengthening ties with Russia and China. All of that positioned him as a threat in the eyes of the West. And if history is anything to go by, we already know how far they would go to eliminate such a threat and install their own puppet in power. But the coup failed. Traoré survived. However, that didn't settle the issue. The story escalated from there. Within days of the failed attempt, the U.S. State Department raised its travel advisory for Burkina Faso to level 4, the highest level of warning.
Meaning they urged all Americans to remain where they are and not travel to Burkina Faso at this point, citing instances of kidnapping, terrorism, and crime in the state. So they said state of emergency was declared for some regions in Burkina Faso, and they urged Americans not to travel to Burkina Faso, stating that if they travel, they are on their own.
But the reality on the ground tells a different story. Since Traoré came to power in September 2022, Burkina Faso has seen a radical shift in governance.
Under Traoré's leadership, the economy has strengthened, with Burkina Faso's GDP rising from $18.8 billion to $22.1 billion, a testament to the country's growing independence. By prioritizing the local processing of resources, including gold and agricultural produce, Traoré has ensured that national wealth benefits Burkinabe citizens, rather than being siphoned off by foreign interests. Agriculture, the backbone of Burkina Faso's economy, has seen unprecedented support under Traoré's administration. Farmers have been equipped with modern machinery, improved seeds, and necessary farm inputs, leading to increased productivity and greater food security.
Apparently, those are exactly what makes Traoré so dangerous. Not to his people, though, but to the systems that have kept countries like Burkina Faso dependent on them for decades now. If Traoré survives long enough to stabilize his reforms, if he manages to fund the government without IMF loans, he becomes something the Western alliance can't afford. Proof. He would become the proof that a small African country can stand on its own, manage its own wealth, and resist the global financial order. And y'all have to understand what we're seeing now is way bigger than a fight for control in Burkina Faso alone. It's a test case, a warning shot, and if it fails to stop him, the blueprint will spread. Countries like Mali, Niger, and Guinea have already aligned with Traoré's model. This is a regional bloc pushing for military independence, economic cooperation, and monetary freedom from France. The alliance has already refused to cooperate with ECOWAS sanctions, expelled foreign troops in their countries, and begun drafting plans for a shared gold reserve system to stabilize their economies without Western support. If they take it a step further, that would mean breaking the suffocating grip of the US dollar and CFA franc on these African nations. The CFA franc, especially, has tied 14 African nations to France since colonial times. No more waiting for European central banks to approve spending decisions. And no more accepting interest-bearing loans when there's actual gold under the soil. And if they don't need the dollar, the petrodollar system will collapse. The US will lose its advantage of printing money at will to buy real-world assets. France will lose its last reliable economic control over West Africa. These are all what the Western powers have always feared: Africa with leverage. Not just one leader standing up to them, but an entire region taking their destiny into their own hands. A region that owns its mines, controls its currencies, and sells its oil, cobalt, uranium, and gold on its own terms, in a currency it created. In that world, Washington and Paris don't get to decide what stability looks like. They don't get to set the rules. They become just another buyer in a market they no longer dominate. And once that shift begins, it won't stop in West Africa. The entire continent will be redeemed. That's the real threat Traoré represents. But do you think he'll succeed? Or do you think he will end like the Gaddafis? And then why do you think Western powers are so obsessed with control over other countries, especially in Africa and the Middle East? Why can't they just mind their business? Please feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth videos like this. Meanwhile, you should click on any of the cards on your screen right now to watch more of our videos.